sort of amazed how quickly Mondays appear, how quickly time is continuing passing. As Brian Fishman, who's behind the scenes with me right now, we're just sort of amazed that we're nearing the end of July. When I was writing the date down, I thought it might be May today. I want to talk today. It's just me. I don't have a guest to share with. I want to talk about Viktor Frankl and his influence in our world, and personally his influence on me and my own thoughts. Because I first read Man's Search for Meaning, I think it was 1994, and his lessons of perspective. I always, from the first time I read it until now, I found so important and meaningful. Viktor Frankl, for those who aren't aware, is a psychiatrist, a therapist, and a man who lived through the Holocaust. Vienna, Austria, was in, I think, 4 different camps. He lost his wife, who was pregnant, as they were taken into a camp. He lost his parents. He lost his brother. I'm sure untold other more distant family members and friends, of course, too. Surviving the Holocaust and then coming up with this philosophy of logotherapy, of how we look at the world, our perspective. One of the most powerful stories was when we talked about how even in the most difficult of times, when everyone was starving, had been beaten, you'd see an individual who would give their last scrap of bread to someone who was in greater need. And the quote from Man's Search for Meaning that I always found so important was, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstance, to choose one's own way." And I think for us today, in the midst of these challenging times, that's such an important reminder of we still have the ability to choose our own perspective, to choose how we will look at our world, and from there, choose action, right? And what we'll be doing and how we manage this. I also remember reading something in 1994 that I found so remarkably important because it was one of the most romantic things that I'd ever come across. And it was Viktor Frankl talking about his wife, and he's on a death march. Yet he's lifted himself out of that physical reality into something in his mind, thinking of his wife. And here's that page. My mind still clung to an image of my wife. A thought crossed my mind. I didn't even know if she were still alive. I knew only one thing, which I have learned well by now, that love goes very far beyond the physical person of the beloved. It finds its deepest meaning in its spiritual being and inner self. Whether or not he is actually present, whether or not he's still alive at all, it ceases somehow to be of importance. I didn't know whether my wife was alive. I had no way of finding out. But at that moment, it ceased to matter. There was no need for me to know. Nothing could touch the strength of my love, my thought, the image of my beloved. Had I known then that my wife was dead, I think that I would still have given myself, undisturbed by that knowledge, the contemplation of her image, and that my mental conversations with her would have been just as vivid and just as satisfying. And I think that that became so powerful for me because I read that literally the week that I was about to propose to my wife and get engaged. But that reality for him, that he was able to lift himself out of that physical space and the torment of it to something else so beautiful and be okay, I just found, like I said, remarkable. So a couple months ago, in the beginning of the pandemic, I got an alert that a new book was coming out. And the book is called Yes to Life in Spite of Everything. And Viktor Frankl's been dead for about 23 years. I think he died in 1997. And so how could there be a new book by Viktor Frankl? But it's a series of essays, 3 essays of his lectures that he gave 9 months after his liberation, after the end of the Holocaust, before his book, Man's Search for Meaning, came out. And it was him beginning to put that book together in a sense, right? And I wanted to share the opening of one of the lectures because I found, again, this to be on that same level of him talking about his wife, but what he was able to create. And so this is him giving this lecture. There's a small town in Bavaria called Landsberg, about 50 kilometers west of Munich. South of it, a road leads to a town of Markkoffering, 5 kilometers away. At the beginning of last year, As day was dawning, 280 men marched along the street. The column consisted of rows of five and was escorted by SS soldiers. It's a group of prisoners from the concentration camp in Kaufering. They walked to a nearby forest where they were to build a concealed munitions factory of enormous proportions. These were ragged, down and out figures walking down this street. Walking is the wrong description. They hobbled. They dragged themselves along, in many cases hanging on to each other, supporting one another. Their legs swollen, bulging from hunger, edema. They could barely support their bodies, weighing on average only 40 kilograms. Their feet ached, they're raw. And that what was going on in the brains of these men, they thought about the soup that would be doled out for their only meal of the day in the evening at camp. After returning from work site, and wondered whether that evening as well as the watery broth, they'd be lucky enough to grab a potato floating in it. Thought about which group they'd be assigned to in the next quarter of an hour when work started, whether they end up in one of the groups under a dreaded foreman or one of the relatively pleasant ones. So the thoughts of these people revolved around the daily troubles of a concentration camp inmate. Then one of the men felt these thoughts were somehow too pointless. He tried to rise above them and think other thoughts more decent human concerns. He was not quite able to do it, but then he used a trick. He tried to distance himself from the whole agonizing life to get beyond it by looking at it, as they say, from a higher vantage point, or from a viewpoint of the future, in a sense, a future theoretical observation. What did he do? He imagined he was standing before a lectern at a Viennese adult education college and giving a lecture. And it would be about what he was currently experiencing in his mind. He gave a lecture entitled Psychology of the Concentration Camp. If you looked more closely at that man in the group, you would have noticed he had sewn onto his coat and his trousers small scraps of linen on which a number was visible, 119104. If you had looked through the Dachau camp records, you would have found that beside his number was written the name of a camp inmate, Viktor Frankl. Now, for the first time, I would like to really give that lecture in this real hall of this Vienna Adult Education College, the lecture this man had given in his mind at that time. So let me tell you about it. I'm always amazed when I get to be in the presence of a survivor and how they are able to create meaning in life, knowing what they have seen, what they have experienced. And Viktor Frankl articulates that so powerfully in his words right there, and how he was able to, in that moment of despair, find meaning and create that in the rest of his life and really teach us so beautifully. By the way, if you want, since it's only me today, I want to try to have a conversation for these few minutes, a discussion. And so you can shoot me questions in Facebook Live, and I'll try to respond, or things that you're thinking as well. So again, he puts this and gives this lecture 9 months after liberation. And I read something from the Dalai Lama that I think is similar to what his conclusion is, because the Dalai Lama, on the occasion of his 80th birthday, taught his own vision of our world. That one, we have to gain some internal control over our own minds and how we then use it to react to life's difficulties. Two, that we need to adapt an ethic of compassion and altruism and the urge to help others. And three, we finally have to act on that in whatever ways our lives offer. That, I think, in essence, is what Viktor Frankl is saying. That, our perspective, we have the power to control that and then use that for good, no matter what else is happening. Again, yes to life in spite of everything. He talks about Rabbi Hillel and sort of encapsulate the great three-part teaching from Pirkei Avot from the Talmud that Hillel says, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? And for Frankl, that suggests that each of us has our own unique life purpose, and serving others elevates it, right? He actually asks his students, or asks them in lectures, what do you think I believe the meaning of life is, right? And what is this teaching us? He says, it is to find purpose and for me now to help others find purpose and to make that meaningful and to continue this idea of why we live. Thank you, Judy Gorman. I appreciate the support and the shout out, and that you're finding this meaningful too. One last thing from Viktor Frankl. He also focuses on one of the lectures about imperfection. And he says, it reminds me of a prayer we say in the morning blessings, that we're each perfect in our own imperfection. And he says that each of us is imperfect, but imperfect in our own unique way, right? And with that in mind, he says our unique strengths and weaknesses make each of us uniquely irreplaceable. So our lives, no matter what, even when we screw up, even when we recognize our own imperfections, still have meaning, and every single life has meaning, and how important that is. So for me, I mean, some of his lectures get a little erudite at times, but they're not particularly long. I mean, this book is, you can see, is an easy read as far as the time commitment it takes. I like the first half of man's life, man's search for meaning, his main philosophy in life and book. The second half is about logotherapy and how we use that idea of meaning in our therapy in our lives. But the idea of how we find meaning every day is that first part of the book. But this sort of encapsulates it. Again, that's the idea that he wrote this so soon after the Holocaust, and he was able to hold on to these powerful thoughts, and it directed his life. And I think for me, it's such an important reminder in the challenges of our world today, because I think that we can get really overrun with what's going on around us, and really feeling desperate and having such despair and really hopelessness. But the whole idea of finding meaning, purpose, is to motivate us to action. So ultimately, holding on to that yes to life is, despite what else is going on, we have to be acting to make our world better. And so when we see these frustrations, even in our cocoons that we have to exist in a sense, in the pandemic, we're not stuck that we can't do more for others. And so I think we have to implore one another to live this mission and to make our world a better place still, and how significant that is. So hopefully that gives some perspective for today. Look it up, read excerpts from it. I think you'll find it meaningful too, and worthwhile as well. And definitely something that can motivate us to say yes to life and hold on to that forever. A couple other things to share next week. On Monday Morning Musings, I'll be teaching alongside Rabbi Stephen Moskowitz once again. We like to do this once a month together, as he's doing it too now, which is fun. Number two, we're starting another 5-week trip to Israel with our friend Benny Levin and Rabbi Daniel. That trip, though, as opposed to just going through some physical spaces and learning the history, we're going to start talking now some of the political realities and challenges, some of the behind the scenes things that are going on, and understanding them a little more deeply as well. If there's other stuff you want to be learning or classes you'd like to see us teaching, let us know. Of course, our services, even when they're outside now with our drive-in services, are at 6:30. We do them in the parking lot at Temple, and then you can see them online as well. And we're continuing to adapt and learning from your feedback with that. 9 a.m. services are quick minions in the morning on Shabbat during July. It's only one more Shabbat of July. And 10 a.m. Sunday morning minion on Zoom. And for those who want to keep studying, our Torah class is 9:30 every Shabbat morning, as we always have done. And that's a Zoom link. And so let us know if you'd like to be a part of it. So, can you help us, David Solomon asks, understand the Jewish perspective on mantra-based meditation? No. No, I'm just kidding. Well, the mystics, I mean, there's different levels of meditation. And let's turn to my friend that I talked to last week, Brandon Klein, and some of his teaching. Because a mantra is just a vehicle to find ourselves centered and to be able to focus ourselves inward for meditation. So I like the idea, if I'm to use a mantra, something that has meaning in life. Jews like Shema, something we're very familiar with, that can become just an easy repetition, but actually is a meaningful thing in that as well. And so it's just a mantra is a way, in my mind, to help us focus, to lift us into that place of meditation. So, hey, thanks for your questions. Thanks for being a part of this morning. And I encourage you to pick up some Viktor Frankl reading and find meaning in it as well. And yes to life.